Thank you very much for those member statements. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I asked the Premier a very simple question. I asked if a company was applying pressure to the government in the same way that SNC-Lavalin was applying it in Ottawa, would Nova Scotians ever know? The Premier took a very wide berth around that question, Mr. Speaker, and he talked about exports and life and HRM and some wonderful things about Nova Scotia that are all very nice, Mr. Speaker. But what we didn't hear was an answer to that very simple question. So I'd like to try it again. My question for the Premier is, with our toothless lobbyist registry still in place, how would Nova Scotians ever know if a company was lobbying our government or putting pressure on our government for any reason?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable for the question. Mr. Speaker, we continue to make investments, work with companies not only in this province but around those who want to continue to invest. Very proud of the work we did with IBM today. Mr. Speaker, an innovative program, the first of its kind in Canada, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to ensuring that every young Nova Scotian gets an opportunity to find the skills that are required to move into the workforce. We're partnering with private sector entities, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member referred to a lobbying complaint, Mr. Speaker, that went to the RCMP and found there was no lobbying, Mr. Speaker. I have all the faith in the RCMP. The honourable member doesn't. He should stand in his place and say so.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Very wide berth, Mr. Speaker, yet again. I don't know why the Premier doesn't want to just disclose who he's meeting with. That's the question. What's being hidden here by the failure to disclose? The Premier may remember my colleague from Pictou West asked the Premier a similar question last year about the very case that the RCMP had to be called in for. RCMP had to get called in, Mr. Speaker. The Premier didn't answer that question then when he was asked what he was meeting with. He did tell us about his wonderful friendship with the former Prime Minister, and that's very nice too, Mr. Speaker. But what we want is a little transparency. Nova Scotians just want to know if their government's being lobbied. They just want to know how their tax dollars are being spent. So will the Premier acknowledge that there are serious dangers to good government when companies are allowed to lobby cabinet ministers and the Premier unchecked and unreported?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member just referred to the question that was asked last year, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the RCMP were called in, Mr. Speaker, and in fact, they confirmed there was no lobbying in this particular case, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm going to ask the honourable member, I will stand with the RCMP, Mr. Speaker. If the honourable member doesn't trust the RCMP, stand in his place and tell us.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there's a series of people involved in that equation, and the RCMP is one of them that I do trust. But let me give a quick example of what I'm talking about. The government wants to amend legislation around credit unions. The Privacy Commissioner has serious commissions about the impact on personal information. But this government figures they'll just plow ahead and disregard the concerns of Nova Scotians, including the Privacy Commissioner. And we don't know, and we'll never know with the way that the rules are now, who is lobbying the government for this change? Who is pushing on the government for this change? Who's pressuring the government? We will never know under the way the laws are now. So a simple question for the Premier, might be able to break it down to yes or no for us would be good. Does the Premier believe that Nova Scotians have a right to know who the Premier of this province is meeting with and for what purpose?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I often tell Nova Scotians who I'm meeting with, Mr. Speaker, but the honourable member would know there are times when you have meetings with people for proprietary information. There are times when you're in negotiations, Mr. Speaker, that you continue to meet with those people when there's something that impacts the province. We communicate that out many times. So we're going to continue, Mr. Speaker, to continue to move our province forward, continue to grow, Mr. Speaker, the economy of Nova Scotia, work with the private sector to make sure we create good jobs in the province, Mr. Speaker. Population is at an all-time high. More young people are seeing their future for themselves in this province, Mr. Speaker, because it's not only because it's the private sector in this province that sees the future, Mr. Speaker, it's the global private sector that's looked into Nova Scotia. And again, Mr. Speaker, IBM stood with Nova Scotia today, the first jurisdiction in Canada actually to put a program together to give young people a hope for the future and a job opportunity in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Recently, when we and the media have spoken about all the alternate level of care patients living in our hospitals as a result of the lack of new long-term care facilities, the government has responded that not all of those alternate level of care patients are people waiting to be transferred into long-term care. Well, Mr. Speaker, an awful lot of them are. According to documents that we received this week through Freedom of Information, of the 2,009 people discharged from alternate level of care beds last year, 1,246 of them were either transferred to a long-term care facility or they passed away. Will the Premier acknowledge that a clear, preponderant majority of ALC patients last year in Nova Scotia were people who were waiting to be transferred to long-term care?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure the number who are in those in those particular beds that you're referring to that are looking to be transferred to long-term care beds, but what I can tell the honourable member is those that are who have been medically positioned that they're going to a long-term care bed are on the long-term care list.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, here is a fact. From 2009 till 2013, the NDP opened 1,000 new nursing home beds and budgeted for an additional 350 beds and 780 replacement places in long-term care. And here is another fact. All of those plans came to one grinding, screeching halt when the Liberals came to power. Will the Premier confirm this third fact, that the total bed capacity of the long-term care sector in Nova Scotia since October 2013 has been increased by exactly zero?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, he stood in this House, he's members of his caucus that continue to fight against the long-term care beds that we wanting to build in Cape Breton. I hope the honourable member would see that as a good sign and stand up and support them.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier has spoken about the planned nursing home beds in the CBRM, but I'm not speaking about planned beds. I'm not speaking about future beds. I'm not speaking about somewhere on the drawing board beds. I'm talking about beds. Real beds that real people have real pillows on, have covers, sheets, and that somebody's going to sleep in tonight. So I want to ask the Premier, will the Premier confirm that the total actual bed capacity in the long-term care sector in Nova Scotia has not increased 1 inch since he came to power?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, where do I begin, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question again, Mr. Speaker. He talks about plans, Mr. Speaker. I want to remind the honourable member the beds that he's referring to, that he's patting himself on the back and his party on the back for, Mr. Speaker, were initiated by the Rodney MacDonald government, Mr. Speaker. He put the plaque on them, Mr. Speaker. I'll give him that much credit for that, Mr. Speaker. But what I would actually want him to do, the next opportunity he gets to stand in this place, to endorse the redevelopment in Cape Breton that has doubling the long-term care beds in those communities.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of TIR. Yesterday, I asked what I thought was a fairly straightforward question, whether the people of Hensport would be getting a new abattoir. The response from the Minister was, and I quote, "We are providing a solution to equal the volume of water that was available through wooden culverts, but with the proviso being able to add gates to those two new concrete structures." I asked a simple yes or no question about an abattoir, and the portion of the Minister's response that dealt with the actual structure was 34 words, which did not include the words yes, no, or abattoir. So my question, I'll try again, my question for the Minister is, will the new structure being installed at the mouth of the Halfway River prevent salt water from entering the river?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to rise and talk about the solution that has been implemented, is being implemented. Piles are being driven today for the people of Hansport, and I have here a letter from the folks in the Hansport area who are thanking the government for the work that's being done. I'd like to table that, Mr. Speaker. What we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is implementing an engineering solution, not a political one.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for that answer and look forward to seeing that tabled letter. However, if that was the same letter that was tabled yesterday, that letter clearly states that the group expects the repair or replacement will create the conditions where, in time, the watershed will heal and become the lush green farmland it once was. The Abateau Action Group has laid out their expectations that the structure will stop the inflow of seawater, and only a fully functioning Abateau will do this. My question for the Minister is, does he acknowledge that in tabling his letter yesterday and claiming it supports his plan, and that has he now obligated himself to provide the structure the Abateau Action Group actually wants?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
We are very confident, Mr. Speaker, that the solution that is coming from our very talented engineers and the private sector contract will ensure that the lush conditions will be restored to that beautiful area of Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, the standard measure of overcrowding in hospital emergency rooms is called NEDOCS. The measure gives emergency departments a score from 0 to 200, depending on the severity of overcrowding, where 0 is fine and 200 is dangerously overcrowded. We learned this morning that just a few days ago, the Halifax Infirmary Emergency Department had a NEDOCS score of 420. Remembering that 200 was dangerously overcrowded, we're now at 420. Does the minister believe that this number indicates a crisis in the patient flow of emergency rooms?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for raising this important question in the legislature. Mr. Speaker, of course, we recognize both as government and our partners at the Health Authority and the MCI that provide EHS services, excuse me, recognize the pressures on our emergency departments, Mr. Speaker. That's why the partners have come together, Mr. Speaker, to work to identify solutions, Mr. Speaker, and those solutions are moving to action, Mr. Speaker, and we're looking forward to seeing improvements within that patient flow throughout our emergency departments.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, you cannot deny the numbers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning the Health Committee met, members of the Health Committee, and spoke with stakeholders from government, the Health Authority, EHS, and the Paramedics Union. Because I live in Cape Breton, where ambulances sometimes come from as far away as Antigonish when responding to a call, I asked the paramedics what happens when a family member in cardiac arrest at home and you call for an ambulance. Terry Chapman of the IUOE told me, and I quote, "You wait with a person who will probably be non-living by the time the ambulance arrives." Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the minister, is it appropriate that people should expect to die because ambulances are backed up waiting to offload patients?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for noting the important topic that was brought forward to the Health Committee respecting ambulance offloads in emergency departments and how those delays, Mr. Speaker, that have been ongoing since I believe one of the witnesses referenced these issues starting around the mid-2000s that hadn't been addressed, Mr. Speaker, are being addressed, that our partners have been coming together, and we anticipate, Mr. Speaker, with the changes that have been identified and are in the process of being implemented, that we'll see those transfer times improve, have more ambulances out in the communities, Mr. Speaker, because they're spending less time transferring patients into the emergency departments.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. At a local meeting held on Tuesday, March 12th at the NSGEU main office, dozens of nurses gathered to talk about what is going on in the workplace. Their message was clear. The healthcare system is at a breaking point. The Nova Scotia Health Authority refuses to deal with the critical shortage of nurses. Frontline healthcare workers are being left to drown, and I can table that quote. Nurses at this meeting reported that their new norm is being overcapacity at 150%. working 2 nurses short on a unit and being told, just tough it out, get through your shift. So I want to know, does the minister believe with this information that is acceptable and safe for anyone to be in those working conditions?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I again want to acknowledge to the member opposite that the concerns of frontline healthcare workers are shared, Mr. Speaker, in terms of when the system is feeling pressure. But as far as, Mr. Speaker, the reference to shortages, Mr. Speaker, the workforce information around nurses is there's been a lot of work with partners in the unions as well as with the employers to ensure that we do have adequate nursing supply in the province. Mr. Speaker, as I look forward to the work continuing to ensure that we have the appropriate staffing available because the people are trained and available here in the province.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Okay, so as my colleague said earlier, to give an example of just how chaotic and unsafe our hospitals are right now, NEDOCS is a universal program, and it's used to score and track the severity of overcrowding in our emergency departments. And I know the numbers were given out, and of course we know that 200 is considered dangerously overcrowded. But guess what? Halifax, we're seeing a number of 420. And NSHA used to disclose those numbers so the public would know. But since 2016, they no longer. So I want to know, will the minister today promise he'll start making these numbers public so Nova Scotians know what's going on in their emergency departments?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I can advise the members that the data that she's referencing is shared, Mr. Speaker, within the department. It's data being used as part of the administration and the operations of the hospital system. So, Mr. Speaker, that's the information I have. As far as overall, Mr. Speaker, we continue to recruit and hire nurses. We work with our partners to identify through the nursing strategy where to best target our resources. Recently, that's been a focus on nurse practitioners in particular, Mr. Speaker, expanding the number of seats for more nurse practitioners through the Dalhousie Medical School program, investing, Mr. Speaker, to help support financially those nurses who want to upgrade their skills to become nurse practitioners. Those are steps that we're taking, Mr. Speaker, to ensure we have the right nursing mix within our province to deliver the care for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Argyle-Barrington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question for you is to the Minister of Internal Services. I'm sure the minister is familiar with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The EFF is one of the world's leading nonprofit defenders of digital privacy and liberties. This week, they ranked this province alongside the CIA as quote-unquote bad actors who attempted to thwart the quest for truth in 2018, and I will table that document. The province earned this distinction from its handling of the FOIPOP leak last spring. My question to the minister is, how does she reconcile this government's claim to be the most transparent ever with EFF's assessment that it has actively thwarted the quest for truth?
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for the question. We had 2 independent reports that came out in January talking about our privacy breach from last year, which that particular article was referring to. And within those 2 reports, there were a number of recommendations that myself and the department accepted 100% and took action on immediately. We've already made some significant strides, not just since the reports were released, but also prior to the breach itself and since the breach itself, and we continue to move forward on all of those recommendations to make sure that we do better in the future.
The Honourable Member for Argyle-Barrington.
You know, these judgments are coming from a non-partisan organization based in San Francisco, so nobody nearby, but somebody that's watching privacy issues across the world. They said that some seriously terrible security practices by Nova Scotia officials caused this debacle. And once again, that's the message that's being broadcast out to the world, that our Internal Services Department failed repeatedly to safeguard personal data. My question to the minister, given all this, does she maintain that putting the people in charge of the FOIPOP leak, in charge of fixing the leak, is a constructive idea.
The Honourable Minister of Internal Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member again for the question. We have moved forward as a department within shared services within ICTS and have taken the lessons that have learned from this breach and how we've evolved within technology extremely seriously. Already we've moved on the Auditor General's recommendation number 1, so we've completed and communicated a web technology guideline. We've completed privacy impact assessments. We've engaged an external consultation to review the Architectural Review Board, and effective on April 1st, at the start of the new fiscal, there's going to be a new structure, a single project management office in place at ISD. So yes, I feel very confident that my team is going to be able to move forward and have proven to be able to move forward.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. Yesterday at Public Accounts, I asked the Deputy Minister of Internal Services if he thinks the Privacy Commissioner should have order-making power beyond merely making recommendations. The Deputy Minister stated it's not in their power to say, and said that would be a question for the Minister of Justice. So my question is this, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree or disagree that giving order-making power to the Privacy Commissioner would increase governmental transparency? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for the question. We certainly appreciate the work that the privacy officer does on behalf of Nova Scotians, and we believe she has all the authority she needs in advancing recommendations to government.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, at Public Accounts yesterday, the Deputy Minister was also asked if he felt the province should update its laws to comply with the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which is quickly becoming an international standard. Now, the General Data Protection Regulation helps protect people's data, and it gives them more control over that data. Again, the Deputy suggested we ask the Minister of Justice. So my question that I'd like to ask the Minister, does he disagree that updating our laws to comply with the General Data Protection Regulation would help protect the personal data of Nova Scotians? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure my colleague that protecting the data of Nova Scotians is a priority of our government. We are looking at the reports that have recently been filed, Mr. Speaker. The department continues to do work on reviewing legislation that presently exists, and I look forward to bringing something forward in the future to address that.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. When this government eliminated local democratically elected school boards, they also eliminated public input in the school site selection process. Siting of a school used to be guided by a board-level selection committee that included SAC members, school board members, the African Nova Scotian representative, the Mi'kmaq representative, and members of municipal council. The revised Education Act regulations that came into effect last year eliminated any requirement for community involvement and consultation. The site selection process is now entirely an internal government process, and we know how those go. Mr. Speaker, does the minister think it's appropriate that this government has eliminated all public accountability and transparency in decision-making about school site selection?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, that's not true. We changed the governance model of education because we had 3 independent reports identifying the fact that that governance model was contributing to there being a variance in the achievement level of students. We made those changes for students, Mr. Speaker. The member speaks of that system as an epitome of democratic achievement. We only had 3% of our population voting in those elections. Close to 70% of our school board members were claimed, and this wasn't a process that the public was thoroughly engaged in, Mr. Speaker. So we do have to make our decisions based on the needs of our students, and that is exactly what we're doing. When it comes to site selection, Mr. Speaker, we are changing that process because the last site selection process contributed to delays up to 3 years for building our schools. We want to make sure we get our schools built on time. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, I'm not talking about school boards, I'm talking about site selection, and the 3-year number that the minister keeps trotting out is a red herring. Maybe once or twice in general, the average time of actually consulting the public, which I know this government has a hard time doing, was closer to 6 months. Schools are an important part of any community, Mr. Speaker. The decision of where to build a new school should include community voices. I can't believe this is an issue. Consultation should be a given. The Musquodoboit Harbour and Area Chamber of Commerce has been trying to engage in this process for almost a year, notwithstanding the comment that it's coming. They're extremely frustrated with the lack of communication, and I'll table that from the department. In July, they wrote to the minister to ask first that the new school be built in the centre of the community, and second, that the minister provide a defined, transparent and collaborative process for them to follow, and they have gotten no response, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister please table the plan for public engagement, not talk more about school boards, in the site selection process?
Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member mentioned elected school boards in the preface of her question. I thought that was an important item to address. When it comes to site selection, the reason why we did have delays between 6 months and 3 years on average was because we did not do a technical evaluation first of sites. So we are moving from a process where the community selects a number of sites to be evaluated to a process where we do the technical evaluation first, beginning with the current site of the school. Once the technical evaluation is done, if the building can actually be serviced, we then go to the community and ask for input. We do that through the municipality, we do that through public consultation, through dealing with the SAC, and in the case of the CSAP, the school board, Mr. Speaker. So we are streamlining a process to create an efficiency, to get rid of delays, hopefully, in the system. That process will continually involve the public.
The honourable member for Queen Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Education. Teachers and parents have had enough issues dealing with the slow infiltration of cell phones in classrooms. Now they have reason to be concerned about vaping, not just on school grounds, but inside schools. Teachers at the Cobequid Educational Centre in Truro report instances of students vaping in washrooms, hallways, and even in the classroom, and I'll table that document, Mr. Speaker. Vaping is far from harmless, as established by the Lung Association of Nova Scotia, and the Provincial Smoke-Free Places Act treats it the same way as smoking cigarettes. My question to the minister is, does the Minister of Education maintain data on students disciplined for vaping on school property?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We currently have rules in place that prohibit vaping. There's a challenge with those particular devices because the scent is obviously not the same as using tobacco or other products. So enforcement of those rules is a bit more challenging. The best thing we can do in our education system, however, Mr. Speaker, is empower our students with information so they can be strong people, confident people in making their own decisions when it comes to their health, their bodies, and how they act, Mr. Speaker. So that is why we're focused on curriculum, on teaching, and ensuring that we're getting every single one of our students in the system the information that they need to make good decisions.
The honourable member for Queen Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I haven't found a curriculum yet that's talking about vaping, but our students are engaging in an increasing number of behaviours in the classroom that we simply should not tolerate. Teachers that I am talking to are saying that students are becoming more casual about the use of vaping devices in school. The Lung Association of Nova Scotia says they're at a red alert state when it comes to youth and vaping. Clearly, the provincial education policy is not doing enough to deter students from vaping in our schools. My question for the minister is, will he consider amending the provincial code of conduct to impose serious penalties on students caught vaping in school?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Always open to hearing about suggestions from the members opposite about how to enhance our policies and practices, Mr. Speaker. But at the end of the day, the smoking, vaping, they are in our health and wellness curriculum. I'm happy to give that information to the member. It is up to our teachers to implement that curriculum as they see fit in schools where they're having a greater problem with this. My hope is that the administrators and teachers will have a greater focus on teaching and learning in that regard, Mr. Speaker. Because at the end of the day, that's the best impact we can have on our students, give them the information they need, empower them to make the appropriate decisions for themselves, and to be good, responsible peers and role models for those around them.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. On March 8th, the NSHA President and CEO wrote a newsletter and posted it on the NSHA website. In the letter, the President and CEO states, the suggestion that everyday people seeking help are being sent away from hospitals and told to make their own decisions is not only false, it is dangerous, and I'll table that. In fact, Mr. Speaker, sadly, that very suggestion is the truth. Possibly the minister heard about 60 stories in 60 days, or the stories we read into the record as member statements last week, and there are many more. This despite treatment guidelines requiring suicidal, non-intoxicated adults to see a specialist, not to be sent home, and I'll table that. My question for the minister is, does the Minister of Health stand by the comments made by the NSHA President and CEO last week?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member again for bringing this important question about mental health services to the floor of the legislature. This, Mr. Speaker, is a topic and an area of our healthcare system that I and I believe my colleagues throughout the legislature share. What I can advise the member opposite is that, in fact, much work is being done by government and our partners, not just in the health authority, but through our education system, Mr. Speaker, to provide new and additional investments and supports, provide more supports in our community, investments in the adolescent outreach model, known as Caper-based in Cape Breton, expanded that to other communities. I believe over 40 additional schools having access to that, Mr. Speaker, so our youth have access to those supports in their community where they need them.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, if someone comes to an ER department in this province while having angina and chest pain, they would be monitored with a cardiac monitor and blood work would be done. If it was determined they were having a life-threatening heart attack, they would be admitted and referred to a specialist in that field, an internal medicine physician. If someone comes to an ER in this province while having thoughts of suicide or even having made an attempt on their own life, often no assessment or treatment is done. ER docs in many cases have no acute care beds for an acute mental illness and maybe even no beds at all in some cases. In many cases, ER docs have no specialists in the mental illness field to refer the patient to. My question for the Minister of Health is this: why does his health care system not have adequate services for acute mental illnesses like we have for acute heart disease?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the province does have acute care specialists for mental health conditions, Mr. Speaker. We have psychiatry specialists, Mr. Speaker, to provide...
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
To provide specialized acute care. Some of the things that we've been doing recently, Mr. Speaker, recognizing that having access to these, some specialists, Mr. Speaker, is leveraging technology and allowing video consults in our communities to access other specialists from across the province, Mr. Speaker. That's been working. We've been working to advance other support mechanisms to support those specialists we do have in communities, like clinical assistance programs. We're investing, Mr. Speaker. We recognize the challenges, and we're investing to improve our mental health access across this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Springville Bridge is a crucial crossing point on the East River. I tabled a petition today asking for a swift replacement of this bridge, but I understand that significant structural problems were discovered and the bridge remains closed for quite some time now. My question to the minister is, can the minister share the problems found with the bridge and update the House as to the status?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate the question from the member. And I took the opportunity to actually visit that lovely community and stood on the bridge last fall and had a look at what we're doing. We are in the process of coming up with a solution to replace the bridge. That's being actively considered at the present time, sir.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the minister's response there. It's a crucial crossing for people that live in the communities in that area. The required detour adds an extra 20 to 25 minutes to travel times for residents each way, results in students be on the bus almost an hour a day extra, and it's a big delay for emergency response and obviously for hospital staff getting to work as well. So I'd like to ask the minister if he can just be shed a little more clarity around the timeline for the expected work on the Springville Bridge.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The responsibility we have in Nova Scotia is for 4,000 structures across the province that are constantly being monitored and scheduled for work being done, of course, based on volumes. I would like to point out, Mr. Speaker, however, to the members of the House, the following information. Fiscal year 2017, $215 million in capital. 18, $225 million in capital. 19, $285 million in capital, and the year ending in 20, $300 million in capital, which amounts to over $1 billion that this government has committed to our capital program, including bridges in Nova Scotia, the most sustained amount of capital expenditure, and I've gone back 16 years, and I can't find a period where we've had more.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, we keep hearing stories of how emergency departments are forced to provide care under harrowing conditions, if they're open at all. We hear stories at the QE2 of doctors apologizing, including one to me, for having no beds, private rooms, or even spaces, and I get treated in the hallway with people walking past me. We hear about patients examined, surrounded by family, sick patients, and total strangers. And while the quality of care is good, doctors are growing tired of always having to perform hallway medicine. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is, during those 600,000 emergency room visits per year, how many times in the run of a month is a patient assessed and treated in the hallways of our emergency departments?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for raising this question. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the access and flow in our emergency departments and throughout our healthcare system is important to the government and our partners at the Nova Scotia Health Authority and the IWK. But Mr. Speaker, we recognize some of the space constraints and challenges. That's why in the central zone at our Halifax Infirmary, Dartmouth General, we do have an extensive capital program with the QE2 redevelopment, Mr. Speaker, investing in modernizing our infrastructure, providing more space, Mr. Speaker, more beds within the system. We're in Cape Breton, we're doing the same thing, Mr. Speaker, expanding. The first time I was in Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker, I toured the emergency department, and space in that emergency department was raised as a #1 concern from physicians on the ground, and we are expanding that by over 40%.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, this is question period, so perhaps that doesn't always require an answer, but I'm actually looking for the answer as to how many times is somebody treated in the hallway, and perhaps if the minister isn't measuring that, he could. 35 years ago, I went to my first lecture as a physiotherapist and learned that over 90% of ER visits should have been managed elsewhere. It's sad to me that 35 years later, we're not much better off. Almost every other week, there's an article in the newspaper about the sad state of our emergency rooms and the backlog. The minister, when he toured the Dartmouth General Hospital, happened to run into me because I'd been in the emergency the night before and they sent me and 25 other people home. There have to be practical solutions, and we want to hear what they are. Can the minister please explain to me why there are still so many patients going to the ER in non-emergency situations, and how much that has to do with the fact that over 100,000 don't have a family doctor?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to advise the member that I believe the latest data shows about 51,000 Nova Scotians, not 100,000, that have registered waiting for a family.
The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
And Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to advise the member opposite that that's for the 4th month in a row that we've seen a decrease in the number of Nova Scotians that have registered looking for access to primary care services. Mr. Speaker, so we're seeing improvements with the investments we've been making and the supports we've been providing to improve our recruitment initiatives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that speaks volumes in terms of the work that's being done. And again, I've talked about the infrastructure expanding to provide the space for those physicians and frontline healthcare workers to do the work that they need to do in the space that's modern to meet the needs of Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question today is for the Minister of Environment. According to the IPCC report, the next decade of emissions reductions is absolutely critical. But I'm sad to say this government's emissions reduction target for 2030 is weak, extremely weak, and that's troubling enough. But to make matters worse, the Premier made comments in the House yesterday that differ from his government's stated targets. In November, the government made a commitment to only 45% below 2005 levels by 2030, saying maybe if we're good, we'll actually get to 50%, whatever that means. But when questioned yesterday, the Premier said he's never talked about 45% and that the province will reach 50% below 2005 levels at least, and I'll table that. These are very different targets, Mr. Speaker. So can the minister please clarify whether the province's actual emissions reductions target is the one announced a few months ago or the one the Premier gave yesterday?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member for the question. It gives me the great opportunity to thank Nova Scotians and all the work that they are doing to reduce our carbon imprint in the province. We were very happy to announce last year, Mr. Speaker, that the province are reducing the limits from 45 to 50% below the 2005 targets. We hope to do better than that, Mr. Speaker. We're giving ourselves a little bit of leeway by saying 45 to 50%, but certainly we know that Nova Scotians want to do better. You know, they're acting, things are changing all the time. You know, whether people are changing to electrification for cars and more electrification across the province. These are all great messages that they're sharing with government, and so we hope to do much better than the 50%. Thank you.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But however, there is only one 2030 target that actually puts us on track to net zero emissions by 2050, and that is 50% below 1990 levels, not 2005 levels. That is the target that our party supports. And the minister's targets simply won't get us there. Now, tomorrow, high school students around Nova Scotia are walking out of class because of government inaction on climate change. They feel it's putting their futures in jeopardy. And Dan Osborne, a grade 10 student at Amherst Regional High School, said this in the paper today, and I quote, "We want the government to stand up to big business. We want an end to pollution and environmental destruction, whether it comes via single-use plastics or unregulated clear-cutting, and we want a plan to bring green jobs to all young Nova Scotians." I'll table this. So I'd like to know, what does the minister have to say to these concerned and courageous young students about her government's inaction on climate change?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the honourable member again for this question. It also gives me the opportunity to say thank you to all these young people that are looking forward to the future. I listened to the honourable member's question across the aisle this morning, her member statement speaking about her daughter and her concern. These young people are the future of our province, and we're going to be looking towards them to help us, to help all Nova Scotians make sure that there is a future for young Nova Scotians and for all Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, over the past couple of weeks, both in question period and emergency debate, I asked the Minister about the lab technologist position at Buchanan Memorial Hospital, Niels Harbour. Much of the discussion centred around point-of-care testing, and the Minister finished his remarks by saying, and I quote, "Individual frontline workers who admit they were hesitant and resistant of the new technology after seeing it implemented in their community hospitals speak quite positively and encourage others to go into these systems with an open mind." And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, Dr. Bernie Buffett recently stated, quote again, that this is not new technology to Buchanan. We introduced point-of-care testing about 6 years ago, and it floated like a lead balloon. It was that burdensome. I'll table that as well. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, who should we believe, the Minister or a doctor at Buchanan with 34 years' experience?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member would know, there are a lot of technological advances that take place between the years, Mr. Speaker. Technology is advancing very rapidly. Point-of-care testing systems would be no different. Mr. Speaker, in terms of who to believe, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the frontline healthcare workers that speak up about their experiences across the province, Niels Harbour, Amherst, Spring Hill, or anywhere else in the province, Mr. Speaker, we believe them all. Mr. Speaker, we have to take all of that information in, and one of the important things that I have to do, Mr. Speaker, is assess that information, and we have to make decisions. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, not all frontline healthcare workers agree on all steps forward. But Mr. Speaker, I stand by the comments that I've made. The information I've received is that many of the sites that have recently received point-of-care systems support that technology.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, residents of North Smoky area feel like they're being treated as second-class citizens when it comes to health care delivery in their area, and this is just proof. Ironically, and likely coincidence, at the same time as I was asking my question, a representative of the Health Authority met with the Hospital Foundation. They were basically informed that point-of-care testing was a done deal and that the Health Authority would not be having a public meeting as a result that had been requested by my office. So my question to the Minister is this. Since the Health Authority doesn't feel a public meeting is necessary at this time, would the Minister please join me in a public meeting north of Smoky to explain the residents of what is taking place at their hospital? No following script, just yes or no.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for continuing to bring to the floor of the legislature the concerns of healthcare providers and community members within his constituency. And Mr. Speaker, again, I assure the member and his constituents that the information being brought forward by Mr. Speaker, those that have worked with this technology, point-of-care testing, have evaluated thoroughly the capacity of this technology to meet the needs of the community hospital. So, Mr. Speaker, as I've noted before, many people have seen these advances and support the implementation of that technology.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. My office has received a number of concerns over the last week regarding potholes that have emerged on highways 111, highways 118, and exit 4N off the 111. Now, on Monday, Mr. Speaker, a massive pothole damaged several vehicles in Dartmouth on Highway 111. CBC reported that the Halifax police had to close a lane while repairs could be made, and I'll table that article. Mr. Speaker, the Minister may be aware that I've been in regular contact with TIR in regard to this issue. Some of these potholes are continuing to cause damage to several vehicles. My question is this: what steps are being taken by the department to prevent damage to vehicles, given the severity of potholes emerging this spring? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member opposite for the question. Our people sprang into action on Monday evening. They worked overnight, filling the potholes. There's a whole program in place now on the highly traded travel areas to capture that. There is a challenge because, as the House might know, the hot patch plants are not open yet. They're not opening until the first week in April, not until the... And in the meantime, we're using cold patch, and we're on to that. I can tell you, you can assure your constituents that we're spending a lot of time fixing those holes. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, if someone takes a drive down to the 111 or the 118, it looks like some of these potholes have been hit by Scud missiles. So the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we all know, everyone in this House knows, when vehicles are damaged on provincial roads due to their poor maintenance, it is often the province that foots the cost. And I'm sure every member of this House has experienced potholes are a recurring problem each spring. And I'm certainly hearing from my constituents in Dartmouth East that they find this year's roads particularly difficult to manage. So my question is this, Mr. Speaker, looking forward, I'd like to hear from the Minister what preventative measures can be implemented to ensure road quality can be maintained so as to mitigate further vehicle damage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to ensure the members in the House and the people of Nova Scotia that this is a problem that we do take seriously. It's not going to be sloughed off as seasonal. It happens every year. We should be used to it. We are actually undertaking a scan to see where the best technology exists in the world to figure out how we can better address the issue of potholes across our system. Part of the process we feel is embedded in the system that we have for repairing it. We feel that there's better solutions out there, and we're looking for them. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of TIR, and in fact, I feel like I'm participating in a Monty Python skit with this exchange about the Hansport Abattoir, because the letter that the Minister tabled a few minutes ago, earlier in question period, was simply a thank you letter for someone for tabling the petition. And the petition actually asked for an abattoir, I believe, and in fact, we don't have an abattoir. So my question for the Minister is, will the Minister admit to the people of Hansport...
Time allotted for oral